Welcome, lovely viewers, to another exciting video. Welcome to another exciting video, where we'll be shedding light on Anaïs Nin, Angela Anaïs Juana Antolina Rosa Edelmira Nin by Culmell, February 21, 1903 January 14, 1977 was a French-born American diarist, essayist, novelist, and writer of short stories and erotica. Born to Cuban parents in France, Nin was the daughter of the composer Joaquín Nin and the classically trained singer Rosa Culmell. Nin spent her early years in Spain and Cuba, about 16 years in Paris, and the remaining half of her life in the United States, where she became an established author. Nin wrote journals prolifically from age 11 until her death. Her journals, many of which were published during her lifetime, detail her private thoughts and personal relationships. Her journals also describe her marriages to Hugh Guiler and Rupert, in addition to her numerous affairs, including those with psychoanalyst Otto Rank and writer Henry Miller, both of whom profoundly influenced Nin and her writing. In addition to her journals, Nin wrote several novels, critical studies, essays, short stories, and volumes of erotic literature. Much of her work, including the collections of erotica Delta, Venus, and Little Birds, was published posthumously amid renewed critical interest in her life and work. Nin spent her later life in Los Angeles, California, where she died of cervical cancer in 1977. She was a finalist for the Neustadt International Prize for Literature in 1976. The time has come to unravel the secrets behind early life and gain a deeper understanding. Anaïs Nin was born in Neuilly, France, to Joaquín Nin, a Cuban pianist and composer, and Rosa Culmell, a classically trained Cuban singer. Her father's grandfather had fled France during the French Revolution, going first to Saint-Domingue, then New Orleans, and finally to Cuba, where he helped build the country's first railway. Nin was raised a Roman Catholic but left the church when she was 16 years old. She spent her childhood and early life in Europe. Her parents separated when she was 2. Her mother then moved Nin and her 2 brothers, Thorvald Nin and Joaquín Nin Culmell, to Barcelona, and then to New York City, where she attended high school. Nin dropped out of high school in 1919 at age 16, and according to her diaries, Volume 1, later began working as an artist's model. After being in the United States for several years, Nin had forgotten how to speak Spanish, but retained her French and became fluent in English on March 3, 1923, in Havana, Cuba. Nin married her first husband, American Hugh Guiler, a banker and artist from Boston, later known as Hugo, when he became an experimental filmmaker in the late years. The couple moved to Paris the following year, where Guiler pursued his banking career and Nin began to pursue her interest in writing. In her diaries, she also mentions having trained as a flamenco dancer in Paris in the mid to late years with Francisco Miral's Ana. Her first published work was a critical 1932 evaluation of D.H. Lawrence called D.H. Lawrence, an unprofessional study, which she wrote in 16 days. Nin became interested in psychoanalysis and studied extensively, first with Rinaldi in 1932 and then with Otto Rank. Both men eventually became her lovers, as she recounts in her journal. On her second visit to Rank, Nin reflects on her desire to be reborn as a woman and artist. Rank, she observes, helped her move between what she could verbalize in her journals and what remained unarticulated. She discovered the quality and depth of her feelings in the wordless transitions between what she could and could not say. As he talked, I thought of my difficulties with writing, my struggles to articulate feelings not easily expressed, of my struggles to find a language for intuition, feeling, instincts which are, in themselves, elusive, subtle, and wordless. In late summer 1939, when residents from overseas were urged to leave France due to the approaching war, Nin left Paris and returned to New York City with her husband. Guiler was, according to his own wishes, edited out of the diaries published during Nin's lifetime. His role in her life is therefore difficult to evaluate. During the war, Nin sent her books to Francis Stelf of the Gotham Book Mart in New York for safekeeping. In New York, Nin rejoined Otto Rank, who had previously moved there, and moved into his apartment. She actually began to act as a psychoanalyst herself, seeing patients in the room next to Rank's. She quit after several months, however, stating, "I found that I wasn't good because I wasn't objective. I was haunted by my patients. I wanted to intercede." It was in New York that she met the Japanese-American modernist photographer Soichi Tsunami, who went on to photograph her for many of her books. In this segment, we'll be unraveling the complexities of journals and exploring its multifaceted nature. Nin's most studied works are her diaries or journals, which she began writing in her adolescence. The published journals, which span 6 decades, provide insight into her personal life and relationships. Nin was acquainted, often intimately, with a number of prominent authors, artists, psychoanalysts, and other figures, and wrote of them often, especially Otto Rank. Moreover, as a female author describing a primarily masculine group of celebrities, Nin's journals have acquired importance as a counterbalancing perspective. She initially wrote in French and did not begin to write in English until she was 17. Nin felt that French was the language of her heart, Spanish was the language of her ancestors, and English was the language of her intellect. The writing in her diaries is explicitly trilingual. She uses whichever language best expresses her thought. In the second volume of her unexpurgated journal, Incest, she wrote about her father candidly and graphically, detailing her incestuous adult sexual relationship with him. Previously unpublished works were released in the Cuff in Space, the Anaïs Nin literary journal, which includes Anaïs Nin and Joaquín Nin y Castellanos, prelude to symphony letters between a father and daughter. So far 16 volumes of her journals have been published. All but the last 5 of her adult journals are in expurgate form. In the upcoming section, we'll be shining a light on erotic writings. Nin is hailed by many critics as one of the finest writers of female erotica. She was one of the first women known to explore fully the realm of erotic writing, and certainly the first prominent woman in the modern West known to write erotica. Before her, erotica acknowledged to be written by women was rare, with a few notable exceptions, such as the work of Kate Chopin. Nin often cited authors Juna Barnes and D.H. Lawrence as inspirations, and she states in Volume 1 of her diaries that she drew inspiration from Marcel Proust, André Gide, Jean Cocteau, Paul Valéry, and Arthur Rimbaud. According to Volume 1 of her diaries, published in 1966, Nin first came across erotica when she returned to Paris with her husband, mother, and 2 brothers in her late teens. They rented the apartment of an American man who was away for the summer, and Nin came across a number of French paperbacks. One by one, I read these books, which were completely new to me. I had never read erotic literature in America. They overwhelmed me. I was innocent before I read them, but by the time I had read them all, there was nothing I did not know about sexual exploits. I had my degree in erotic law. Faced with a desperate need for money, Nin, Henry Miller and some of their friends began in the years to write erotic and pornographic narratives for an anonymous collector for $1 a page, somewhat as a joke. It is not clear whether Miller actually wrote these stories or merely allowed his name to be used. Nin considered the characters in her erotica to be extreme caricatures and never intended the work to be published, but changed her mind in the early years and allowed them to be published as Delta of Venus and Little Birds. In 2016, a previously undiscovered collection of Nin's erotica, or lettres, was published for the first time. Nin was a friend, and in some cases lover, of many literary figures, including Miller, John Steinbeck, Antonin Artaud, Edmund Wilson, Gore Vidal, James A.G., James Leo Herlihy, and Lawrence Durrell. Her passionate love affair and friendship with Miller strongly influenced her both sexually and as an author. Claims that Nin was bisexual were given added circulation by the 1990 Philip Kaufman film Henry and June about Miller and his second wife June Miller. The first unexpurgated portion of Nin's journal to be published, Henry and June, makes it clear that Nin was stirred by June to the point of saying, paraphrasing, I have become June, though it is unclear to what extent she consummated her feelings for her sexually. To both Anaïs and Henry, June was a femme fatale irresistible, cunning, and erotic. Nin gave June money, jewelry, and clothes, often leaving herself without money. In this section, we'll be deep diving into novels and other publications, unraveling its complexities and uncovering valuable insights. In addition to her journals and collections of erotica, Nin wrote several novels, which were frequently associated by critics with the surrealist movement. Her first book of fiction, House of Incest 1936, contains heavily veiled allusions to a brief sexual relationship Nin had with her father in 1933, while visiting her estranged father in France. The then 30-year-old Nin had a brief incestuous sexual relationship with him. In 1944, she published a collection of short stories titled Under a Glass Bell, which were reviewed by Edmund Wilson. Nin was also the author of several works of non-fiction. Her first publication, written during her years studying psychoanalysis, was D.H. Lawrence, An Unprofessional Study 1932, an assessment of the works of D.H. Lawrence. In 1968, she published The Novel of the Future, which elaborated on her approach to writing and the writing process. With the groundwork laid, let's now examine personal life and its connections to our previous discussions. According to her diaries, Vol. 1, Nin shared a bohemian lifestyle with Henry Miller during her time in Paris. Her husband Guiler is not mentioned anywhere in the published edition of the Earth parts of her diary, although the opening of Vol makes it clear that she is married, and the introduction suggests her husband declined to be included in the published diaries. The diaries edited by her second husband, after her death, tell that her union with Miller was very passionate and physical, and that she believed that it was a pregnancy by him that she aborted in 1934. In 1947, at the age of 44, Nin met former actor Rupert in a Manhattan elevator on her way to a party. The two began a relationship and traveled to California together. Pole was 16 years her junior. On March 17, 1955, while still married to Guiler, she married Pole at Quartzsite, Arizona, returning with him to live in California. Guiler remained in New York City and was unaware of Nin's second marriage until after her death in 1977. The biographer Deirdre Bear alleges that Guiler knew what was happening while Nin was in California, but consciously chose not to know. Nin referred to her simultaneous marriages as her bicoastal trapeze. According to Deirdre Bear, in 1966, Nin had her marriage with Pole annulled due to the legal issues arising from both Guiler and Pole trying to claim her as a dependent on their federal tax returns. Though the marriage was annulled, Nin and Pole continued to live together as if they were married until her death in 1977. According to Barbara Kraft, prior to her death, Nin had written to Guiler asking for his forgiveness. He responded by writing how meaningful his life had been because of her. After Guiler's death in 1985, the unexpurgated versions of her journals were commissioned by Pole. 6 volumes have been published: Henry and June, Fire, Incest, Nearer the Moon, Mirages, and Trapeze. Pole arranged for Guiler's ashes to be scattered in the same area where Nin's ashes were scattered, Mermaid Cove in Santa Monica Bay. Pole died in July 2006. Nin once worked at Lawrence R. Maxwell Books, located at 45 Christopher Street in New York City. In addition to her work as a writer, Nin appeared in the Kenneth Anger film Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome 1954 as Astarte, in the Maya Deren film Ritual in Transfigured Time 1946, and in Bells of Atlantis 1952, a film directed by Guiler under the name Ian Hugo with a soundtrack of electronic music by Lewis and Bibi Barron. In her later life, Nin worked as a tutor at the International College in Los Angeles. Brace yourselves for the next chapter, where we'll be dissecting death. Nin was diagnosed with cervical cancer in 1974. She battled the cancer for 2 years as it metastasized, and underwent numerous surgical operations, radiation, and chemotherapy. Nin died of the cancer at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, California, on January 14, 1977. Her body was cremated, and her ashes were scattered over Santa Monica Bay in Mermaid Cove. Her first husband, Hugh Guiler, died in 1985, and his ashes were scattered in the cove as well. Rupert was named Nin's literary executor, and he arranged to have new and expurgated editions of Nin's books and diaries published between 1985 and his death in 2006. Large portions of the diaries are still available only in expurgated form. The originals are located in the UCLA library. As we progress through this video, let's shift our attention towards legacy and uncover its hidden depths. The explosion of the feminist movement in the US gave feminist perspectives on Nin's writings of the past 20 years, which made Nin a popular lecturer at various universities. Contrarily, Nin dissociated herself from the political activism of the movement. In 1973, prior to her death, Nin received an honorary doctorate from the Philadelphia College of Art. She was also elected to the United States National Institute of Arts and Letters in 1974, and in 1976 was presented with a Los Angeles Times Woman of the Year award. The Italian film La Stanza del Parole, dubbed into English as The Room of Words, was released in 1989 based on the Henry and June diaries. Philip Kaufman directed the 1990 film Henry and June based on Nin's diaries, published as Henry and June from the unexpurgated diary of Anaïs Nin. She was portrayed in the film by actress Maria de Medeiros. In February 2008, poet Stephen Raines organized Anaïs Nin at 105 at the Hammer Museum in Westwood, Los Angeles. Raines said, Nin bonded and formed very deep friendships with women and men decades younger than her. Some of them are still living in Los Angeles, and I thought it'd be wonderful to have them share their experiences with. Bibi Baron, an electronic music pioneer and longtime friend of Nin, made her last public appearance at this event. Raines also published an essay refuting Byrne Porter's claims of a sexual relationship with Nin in the US. Raines is the president of the board of the non-profit organization devoted to Nin's legacy, the Anaïs Nin Foundation. Cuban-American writer Dana Chaviano paid homage to Anaïs Nin and Henry Miller in her novel Gota Encerrada 2001, where both characters are portrayed as disembodied spirits whose previous lives they shared with Melissa, the main character and presumably Chaviano's alter ego, a young Cuban obsessed with Anaïs Nin. The Cuban poet and novelist Wendy Guerra, long fascinated with Nin's life and works, published a fictional diary in Nin's voice, Posa Desnuda en la Habana, posing nude in Havana, in 2012. She explained that Cuban diary has very few pages, and my delirium was always to write an apocryphal novel, literary conjecture about what might have happened. On September 27, 2013, screenwriter and author Kim Krizan published an article in the Huffington Post revealing she had found a previously unpublished love letter written by Gore Vidal to Nin. This letter contradicts Gore Vidal's previous characterization of his relationship with Nin, showing that Vidal did have feelings for Nin that he later heavily disavowed in his autobiography, Palimpsest. Krizan did this research in the run-up to the release of the 5th volume of Anaïs Nin's uncensored diary, Mirages, for which Krizan provided the foreword. In 2015, a documentary film directed by Sarah Aspinall called The Erotic Adventures of Anaïs Nin was released, in which Lucy Cavu portrayed Nin's character. In 2019, Kim Krizan published Spy in the House of Anaïs Nin, an examination of long-buried letters, papers, and original manuscript Krizan found while doing archival work in Nin's Los Angeles home. Also that year, Routledge published the book Anaïs Nin, A Myth of Her Own by Clara Oropeza, that analyzes Nin's literature and literary theory through the perspective of mythological studies and depth psychology. In 2002, Alyssa Levy-Kano produced a short film called The All-Seeing based on Nin's short story of the same name in Under a Glass Bell. In 2021, the porn film company Thousand Faces released a short film called Matilde based on Nin's story of the same name in Delta Venus. In the upcoming section, we'll be dissecting diaries and exploring its intricate connections to our topic. The Diary of Anaïs Nin, in 7 volumes, edited by herself. The Early Diary of Anaïs Nin in 4 volumes. Linnet, 1914-20, 1987. 1920-23, 1983. The Journal of a Wife, 1923-27, 1984. 1927-31, 1985. Henry and June, from A Journal of Love. The Unexpedited Diary of Anaïs Nin, 1986, edited by Rupert after her death. Incest, from A Journal of Love, 1992. Fire, from A Journal of Love, 1995. Nearer the Moon, from A Journal of Love, 1996. Mirages, The Unexpedited Diary of Anaïs Nin, 2013. Trapeze, The Unexpedited Diary of Anaïs Nin, 2017. The Diary of Others, The Unexpedited Diary of Anaïs Nin, 2021. A Joyous Transformation, The Unexpedited Diary of Anaïs Nin, 2023. In this section, we'll be shedding light on correspondence and its impact on our understanding of the subject. A Literate Passion, Letters of Anaïs Nin and Henry Miller, 1988. Letters to a Friend in Australia, 1992. Arrows of Longing, correspondence between Anaïs Nin and Felix Pollock, 1998. Moral de Epicentris, 2004. Reunited, The Correspondence of Anaïs and Joaquín Nin, 2020. Letters to Lawrence Durrell, 2020. In this section, we'll be peeling back the layers of novels to reveal its true essence. House of Incest, 1936. Winter of Artifice, 1939. Cities of the Interior, 1959, in 5 volumes. Ladders to Fire, Children of the Albatross, The Four-Chambered Heart, A Spy in the House of Love, Seduction of the Minotaur, originally published as Solo Barqua, 1958. Collages, 1964. In the upcoming portion, we'll be dissecting short stories to gain a comprehensive understanding of its implications. Waste of Timorlessness, and Other Early Stories Written Before 1932, published posthumously in 1977. Under a Glass Bell, 1944. Delta of Venus, 1977. Little Birds, 1979. All Lectures, 2016. In this section, we'll be exploring non-fiction. D. H. Lawrence, An Unprofessional Study, 1932. The Novel of the Future, 1968. A Woman Speaks, 1975. In Favor of the Sensitive Man, 1976. Conversations with Anaïs Nin, edited by Wendy M. Dubo, 1994. The Mystic of Sex, Uncollected Writings, 1930, 1974, 1995. In this chapter, we'll be shedding light on filmography and its role in shaping our understanding. Lascivious Folk Ballet, 1946. Outtakes from Ritual in Transfigured Time. Ritual in Transfigured Time, 1946. Short film, Dear. My Dear and Bells of Atlantis, 1952. Short film, Dear. Ian Hugo, Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome, 1954. Short film, Dear. Kenneth Anger, Jazz of Lights, 1954. Melodic Inversion, 1958. Lectures, Port House, 1964. Anaïs Nin, Her Diary, 1966. Un Moment avec un grand figure de la littérature, Anaïs Nin, 3 May 1968. The Henry Miller Odyssey, 1969. Through the Magiscope, 1969. Aperture, 1970. Anaïs Nin at the University of California, Berkeley, December 1971. Anaïs Nin at Hampshire College, 1972. Ouvres les Guillemets, 11 November 1974. Journal de Paris, 21 November 1974. Anaïs Nin Observed, 1974. Documentary, Dear. Robert Snyder. I hope you learned something new today. Let me know what you found most interesting in the comments below.